Welcome to part 2 of The Rewind. This is not a gender-based violence podcast. However, that's the topic we will be focusing on today. If you missed part 1 of the episode, then what are you doing here? Go back, watch part 1. We promise you won't want to miss that. Then come back to this, because you don't want to miss this either. Okay, so we're back.
We educate, discuss, and bring forth solutions to issues plaguing our community.
I'm Janae Winter.
And I'm Jasmine Lundy. And this is
The Rewind. So as a reminder, our special guest today, we have with us Assistant Clinical Coordinator at the Bahamas Psychological Association, Megan Johnson, and criminal attorney Tai Pinder-Mackey.
So on this show, we don't just talk about the issues, we bring forth possible solutions.
That's right.
In the first episode, various solutions to combating gender-based violence were mentioned, but we want to hear from our guests, Megan and Tai, from a psychological and legal perspective. How can Bahamians better support victims of abuse in society?
Megan?
Okay, that was a question?
Yeah,
yes.
so
how can
we better help victims in our society, victims and survivors?
Now when you say we,
As a community.
As a community.
Yeah, as a public.
We definitely need to be a little bit more non-judgmental. I think Bahamians have a tendency to hold, we were talking about this earlier, to hold other people at the same standard at which they live their lives. And so any content, data, information that you get from others that you can't relate to, you immediately judge and you demean it, or you find it as evil or wrong or whatever. And so if there is no sponge, if there's no source of safety that society can offer people that are hurting, if there's no soft place to land, then no one will fall, no one will share, no one will talk about that stuff. And so I think we have to be a little bit compassionate towards those that we, those things that we don't necessarily experience, and be open and accepting and a little less judgmental. Yeah, that goes a long way.
And Tai, from a legal perspective.
Can you repeat the question?
So how as we as a community in the Bahamas, how can we better support and help victims of abuse in society? Legally, what do you think can be done?
Well, that wouldn't be really a societal effort if it's going to be legal. As I think I mentioned earlier in the first episode, the legislation is there. It is just for members of the community to, sort of support the individual, encourage persons to seek help, assistance of the police, as well as, mental health as well. If a need arises, if you need to see a medical practitioner, you should do so. And also, I think reporting these incidents on a timely basis, immediately after, because, full and frank accounts of what would have transpired is going to help you tremendously. And as well as being full and frank with your attorney as well, that will also help you tremendously. So I think I also echo what Megan would have said, about as a community being less judgmental, etc. But on the legal side of things, I just feel as though the legislation is there, and persons just need to sort of follow through with their complaints as well. Because more oftentimes than not, people would make a complaint, a victim make a complaint, and then once they get to court, they decide that, I don't want to go through with this for whatever reason it may be. And again, it just continues the cycle.
And can I ask a follow-up to that? How does that hurt the process, or hurt maybe possible victims coming forward, those who report and then, drop off, and how does that hurt that
Well,
process?
I don't necessarily think that it should hurt any other victim, simply because each case should be tried on its own merit. And so everybody's experience is different, and I don't think that it should negatively affect somebody's response to their experience. So I always encourage people to first seek police assistance, or like I said, if you need the assistance of a medical practitioner first. But it shouldn't, just because somebody else decided to withdraw their complaint, that has absolutely nothing to do with you.
Agreed.
And your complaint is always valid.
Right.
You know.
Okay. Now we have a few questions for our psychologist, Megan. The first that we wanted to kind of talk about is something that is very heavy on my heart, that I feel really passionate about, and it's really about talking about sex. So parents educating their children and having that sex talk, you know, with them. Now the problem that I find, I feel as though it's really taboo in our society. We don't talk about it, we don't open up about it, and if you do talk about it, it's like, oh, you having sex, or you pregnant, like what you want to know about sex, or what you doing, versus, oh, okay, you're curious, let me help guide you. So my question for you is, how do we better, I guess, normalize the sex talk, or normalize talking about sex and accepting when minors, children are curious about it? That's my first question for you.
Okay, I do agree that it is taboo. In fact, you mentioned that, you know, I'll let you talk about that. But I feel like there's so many elements that you have to consider when you do the sex talk with children. You have to consider their age, the content that they're exposed to, what's appropriate, where they are in their lives, because some 15-year-olds may be different. They may be able to process things differently, just as an example. But I definitely feel like that's an important talk. But again, the taboo-ness, I think one element that contributes to that taboo-ness is that we see sex as a sin in many cases, or it's something that should be secret or behind, right?
It's
And
dirty.
Yeah.
absolutely. And
Out of marriage,
in some degree, some of the ideas we have around sex is true. You know, it is sacred, it is important, it is crucial and critical for life. At the same time, and you withhold information from people that cannot make wise decisions, then they make poor decisions.
Right.
And so I think for parents that struggle with having that conversation, I think it's important to not only impress to them the importance of that conversation, but also kind of prepare them for the conversation. So have a talk with the parent, or I don't know, parents can prepare like, okay, what are we talking about today? What do I think my child is gonna respond like? Like, let me plan and make sure, what are the words that I'm gonna use? How am I gonna say this if they ask this question? If I don't know an answer, what do I do? Who do I direct them to? And I think a huge element of the dynamics in that conversation has to do with the parent-child relationship, and you would have said that earlier. Like, if you don't have a relationship with your child, how are you gonna have a comfortable conversation about sex? That's impossible.
That's true.
And so I think it's making sure that you facilitate that bond between the parent and the child. Talk about random things, everyday things, all the time. Don't be as reactive with children, because if they feel like you respond negatively, they're not going to share.
Shut down.
Right? And so you want to create an environment where your child feels safe coming to you to talk about anything. And that doesn't always start with the sex talk. That starts with, Mommy, I want a cookie out of the cupboard. You had too much cookie today. You understand? It's just a vibe that kids look for when they want to be heard and to be understood. And if they don't have that in the first place, then those talks will always be awkward.
Right.
Now I think, I could be wrong, but just from what I've seen, I feel as though like our generation, or maybe those a little bit before me, like I'm 25, so maybe someone who's about 30, I feel as though they're doing a little bit better with the sex talk, because I know I have a niece and I have a few nephews of my own, and my sister, they have the talk with them, and they're under 10, but when I say talk, at least they make them aware of their body. They don't use, like some people use, oh, that's cookie, and you know, all these different terms. No, vagina and penis, and you let them know, you know, nobody touches this part. If somebody does, it's inappropriate, that kind of thing. Even me, when I see them, I say, did anybody touch you? Or, you know, let you know, like, this is not right. So do you think, just by my experience, do you think persons that are of the generation, the millennial generation, do you think that they're more likely to have that kind of open discussion with their children versus a boomer generation, you know, the older generation?
Now, I have boomer parents. I think they boomers. And we have a really open relationship. So I would never put that limitation on the generation outside of my own, because I'm also a millennial. And so I've seen instances where those outside of my generation are a lot more open, whereas they may be closed-minded, or those within my generation may be closed-minded, and they're very strict and rigid about what life is like. And so I don't put constraints on anyone based on their age or when they were born. And I think that's important because it kind of writes them off before you give them a chance, right? But I definitely feel like today, the climate of the world, the zeitgeist, as we call it, you know, a lot of those conversations are being normalized, where you speak to children plainly. You know, you don't sugarcoat, because that leads to misinterpretation, and then that leads to poor decision making. And so we find that when you are honest and transparent with children, then they process a lot better and they make better decisions. When you try to hide and, you know, you bring secrecy and you kind of criminalize poor decisions at a young age, then you find that you have the environment where things go unsaid. But I definitely feel like in today's culture, we have normalized plain speaking, which is wonderful. I think that's great.
Yeah, I see that a lot.
Yeah.
I'm kind of similar to Janae. I just turned 25, and I have
Happy birthday.
and I have a baby sister who's 10 years younger than me. So I spoke to her about, you know, the inappropriate touching, especially in school, because there are a lot of, I'm not going to say, but there can be predators there. But I told her, but when you're really ready to know certain things, come to me. Don't be afraid to come to me. But I haven't given her those types of advice yet.
Yeah. No, and again, like I said earlier, it has a lot to do with where the child is, how old they are, the dynamics of the relationship. So I think it's good that you would temper your advice based on your relationship with the child, where she goes to school, what she's exposed to. It really is a personal journey. And so I always would defer to parents, because that's your child, you know, that's absolutely, that's your family member, this is your friend, your cousin, right? A stranger wouldn't know as much about this child as you. You know what they're able to handle and process. And so I think it's good to equip those that guide younger children with the tools and the skills and the words and the knowledge that they can have those conversations, and not leave it up to outsiders.
Right.
Because the home is where socialization starts.
And I think we need to be a little bit more realistic with ourselves. The society we live in today is not the same as when we were kids. You have unlimited access to every and anything online. And so we can find kids way younger than the age we would think would ask those questions. They can come and ask those questions because maybe they saw a commercial or a friend of theirs showed them a video. And I think we need to, like you both said, not be judgmental.
And not shut them down.
Right, because the question could not be coming from a sense of, I want to do this. It can just come from, what is this? So let's also be knowledgeable, you know? And if we don't know the difference, ask why are you interested? You know? Let's have that dialogue.
I feel like that's what's missing, the dialogue. But like Megan touched on it, it has to do with trust. Because if you don't feel as though you can even come to your parents with anything, why would you go to something about that when society-wise sex is so, oh my gosh, I have to keep this a secret or else, you know, I could get beaten, or, you know, they could try to kick me out, they think I do and stuff, like all type of concerns children of various different ages have. So I think the dialogue is the most important thing, and you know, one of the solutions is education. We can't deny that, because if you're educated, if you know, okay, this isn't supposed to happen, someone isn't supposed to touch me here, like why is this 35-year-old talking to me and I'm only 15? Like this is not okay, you know, why are you looking at me like that? You're a grown man or woman and I'm a minor. So if we have these conversations, if we be straightforward, personally, I don't agree with calling private parts of food or, you know, these special nicknames and stuff like that. Say it plain. And so I feel as though dialogue is definitely a big thing in helping eradicate the taboo-ness of the sex talk.
And quickly going back to education, parents, obviously, you know, they can't do every single thing, but they should do the majority of the work. But we also have schools, and that's where students spend most of their time. So let's try to update the curriculum. I don't know whether it's health science or family life, whatever class you learn those things in. And we put those things in the curriculum that the children should know. And let's make it like interesting. Don't just teach me about the different parts of the body in grade 11.
Like health class.
Right. Teach me real things that I need to know. So on to our next question. To whom or where can people go to if they need help because they're experiencing mental issues from abuse?
Well, we have a number of entities in the Bahamas, in Nassau specifically. I'm not 100% on the Family Islands, but the good thing, one good thing about the pandemic is that it's brought on more virtual and telecommunicative means of getting help. And so one of the things the Bahamas Psychological Association did in response to COVID and Dorian, well, Dorian and COVID, because Dorian happened first, was, well, this is a part of our mental health and psychosocial support expansion project, where we have different elements in the project that address certain things. So, for example, we have a training component where we have a supervisor that facilitates training with different entities, but what I wanted to bring up was the helpline. So we would have established a helpline with several numbers that people can reach out to if they need assistance, not only psychological, but psychosocial. So if you need resources, if you need food, if you need shelter, if you need those kind of things, then we would be able to direct you. It's almost like a hub. So you call us and we can send you to the Red Cross. We can give you the number for social services if you need it. We can send you to the Great Commission, connect you with someone in Ministry of Health. And so let me just read off those numbers really quickly. So we have a mail line. So that's a line that's manned by a mental health professional, and he deals specifically with male callers. That number is 821-8123. Okay, we also have the general lines. That's 816-3799 and 812-0576. We also have a child and adolescent and parent support line. So we have people that have concerns about their children or schooling, behavioral issues, because the pandemic would have brought on a cacophony of issues for children. That number is 819-7652. We also have we have 2 Creole lines. So for those that are of Haitian descent or only speak Creole, those numbers are 454-2933 or 357-9177. We also have a line in Abaco, specifically for those that are recovering from Dorian. That number is 822-4211, and another general line is 815-5850. I'm sure you guys will put that up so people can see. But they can also call the 711 number that you all mentioned in the last episode. That also is available for help. You can reach out to the Community Counseling and Assessment Center that's attached to the Sandlands Rehabilitation Center. And if you cannot, for some reason, reach any of those numbers, call the hospital, call the police, because we try to get those contacts out to them. And if that doesn't work, find someone that you trust. Speak to someone that accepts you and that you know will not judge you, because we're often triggered when we talk about our concerns and it's not met with grace and compassion. And so I encourage people to identify those people in your life that you find as a support system, build that support system, facilitate those relationships so that you're not left to deal with things on your own.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So there are many resources out there. So
I'm sure I left them out. I'm sure.
So there's a lot to choose from. If you really need it, they're there. We want to thank you so much, Megan, for joining us today. She has to go and save the world, y'all.
Okay, so we're back with Tai Pinder, criminal attorney. Megan had to leave, but we thank her for her presence on this show. Now, we want to question Tai about the laws and how it could possibly protect citizens, visitors, and anyone basically from forms of abuse. So Tai, question is, how does our law protect victims against various different forms of abuse? You know, we have sexual, we have physical, we have mental, and you even said earlier we have financial abuse. So how does the law protect victims?
Well, there are various pieces of legislation, such as the Penal Code, the Sexual Offences Act, the Domestic Violence Protection Orders Act, the Criminal Procedure Code, as well as the Child Protection Act. So these things sort of work to define what is considered illegal, and the penalties and everything are contained in those provisions.
Now, in the case of, I know some of these may be a little bit harder to prove because of evidence. In the case of like emotional abuse, verbal abuse, how would that work in terms of simply you carry a case to court because you want to sue, or you think that someone is verbally abusing you? Let's just say we use the scenario of a minor being verbally abused by their parent. How would that work where the parent could possibly face charges or?
Well, I think it's important to note that it's not really a matter of suing somebody for verbal abuse in the instance in the way you're describing it. So the Domestic Violence Protection Order Act sort of describes the different the various forms of abuse, and maybe I can just read it to you guys so that you understand.
Sure.
And so the Domestic Violence Protection Order Act defines emotional or psychological abuse as meaning a pattern of behavior of any kind, the purpose of which is to undermine the emotional or mental well-being of a person, including persistent intimidation by the use of abusive or threatening language, depriving that person of the use of his property, interfering with or damaging the property of the person, the forced confinement of the person, making unwelcome, unrepeated, or intimidatory contact with a child or elderly relative of the person. Financial abuse, a lot of persons don't realize, but there is such a thing as financial abuse, and that means a pattern of behavior of a kind, the purpose of which is to exercise coercive control over, or exploit, or limit a person's access to financial resources so as to ensure financial dependence. And then the definition of physical abuse, if you just give me one moment, means any act or omission which causes physical injury to a complainant or his child and includes the commission of or an attempt to commit any of the offenses of the nature listed in the first schedule in relation to the complainant or his child. And so what one would do if they find themselves being a victim of any form of this type of abuse, you can actually seek a protection order under this Domestic Violence Act.
So how would they go about that if they don't know what to do?
Well, typically you would engage an attorney. After they would have taken instructions from you, obviously the attorney would look at the act and see exactly how to go about it. They'll make the application on your behalf, and then you appear before the court. And again, everything is decided on its own merit, and then the protection order may or may not be granted.
Now, protection order means what? The person who is expressing these abusive behaviors, what happens?
So the protection order seeks to prevent or to stop
Okay.
whichever behavior that is considered abusive from continuing.
Okay.
You said the first step was to seek an attorney. Is that before, should we make a police report first?
I think a police report will always be helpful. So again, it also depends on the degree of the abuse. I think if it's something well, not simple, no abuse is simple, but let's say it's something like, okay, you're consistently insulting me, or perhaps in a financial abuse case, you're taking money out of a joint account and you're gambling it away, and perhaps the home is now facing foreclosure, things of that nature. You wouldn't go to the police for that. But let's say now you're being attacked. Naturally, you should go and see the police first.
Okay.
And because I feel as though physical abuse may assumed to be easier to prove, or maybe evidence is the right word, but is it as easy when it comes to psychological abuse, emotional abuse, to say, quote unquote, prove?
Well, I always tell persons too that I think that psychological and emotional abuse is subjective and not objective.
Okay.
And so therefore, what may be considered abuse to me may not be considered abuse to you. And so, you bring these things before the court, and then they make a determination whether or not that is reasonably considered, abuse.
Okay.
Okay. So let's say a minor or adult find themselves in an abusive situation where they are literally being pinned down, probably about to be penetrated, or they are forced to consume drugs or alcohol. What can they do in that moment legally to protect themselves from their abuser, and in that moment and afterwards?
Well, I would definitely tell that person to try and defend themselves as best they could. Sometimes the end result of that may be something extremely traumatic. It may result in death, but self-defense is an absolute defense. So one should not just simply lie there and be abused and not put up a defense. There's no reason for you to just sit there and accept abuse. But now we're talking about, though, physical abuse. We're not talking about financial abuse. We're not talking about verbal abuse. Just like in the instance that you're referring to, if you're being pinned down and you're about to be penetrated, you can use whatever force is necessary. To prevent that from happening to you. No one should be subject to abuse on that type of level at all.
Right. And we spoke a little bit earlier about, off camera, about what evidence you may need. If you need any, can you reiterate that?
Well, again, evidence, if it's of a physical abuse nature, sometimes it may be evident, but not all marks are able to be seen by the naked eye, sometimes. So I would always say as well, if it's physical abuse involved, always attend a medical practitioner's office and to help to substantiate your complaint. Sometimes there aren't any visible bruises, but I'm not a medical practitioner, so I can't say exactly what would be validated as something that is physical trauma to the body itself. I can't speak on that.
Okay. I think we've learned a lot today.
I think we have.
And I think many viewers watching would appreciate all of the information that we learned. We want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
And we hope to see you next time. To our viewers, thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to like and share this video and tune in next time to The Rewind.